Hello. These are a few remarks I'm going to make at the forthcoming Oxford Baha'i Studies seminar next month about the 50th anniversary of the British Baha'i Studies seminars. We now have a tradition of academic Baha'i Studies seminars in Britain, which stretches back 50 years. So it's an appropriate moment to make reference to its beginnings. I should also pay tribute here to Dennis McEwan, one of the founders of that tradition who sadly died recently. Year zero, as it were, was effectively in 1972, when Mujan and Wendy Moman invited a number of us to a weekend gathering at their house in London. Compared with today's meeting, this first seminar, I don't think we'd fixed on a definite title at that stage, was far less specific in its purpose. Essentially, it afforded opportunity for a group of young Baha'is to meet and discuss a number of topics in a somewhat academic manner. Five of us, Mujan, Dennis, Paul and Bahia Adams and myself, presented papers which ranged widely over such topics as the prophetic status of Joseph Smith in the light of Baha'i teachings by Mujan, the Word of God by Dennis, an approach to the faith from the standpoint of social anthropology by Paul, including a consideration of Shoghi Effendi's ministry in terms of Levi-Strauss's concept of the bricoleur, medieval love poetry by Bahia, and a comparison of the role of education and its status in Islam and Baha'i by me. That first seminar had no clearly stated objective. Perhaps we just envisaged it as a means of shedding some light on the world by a consideration of Baha'i criteria, whilst at the same time increasing our understanding of the faith by means of various academic disciplines. It was an informal meeting of friends. Enjoyable, but regarded by most of us, I think, as a luxury. We agreed that the weekend had been useful and that we should repeat the venture in the future. The urgency of our intent can be judged by the fact that it was more than 2 years later before we held the second seminar, this time in Durham, where I then lived, with the format much as before. This was followed by several more such meetings in various parts of the country. These meetings, infrequent and diffuse as they were, served to heighten our awareness of the need for Baha'i studies and to increase our critical understanding of their nature. As individuals, our commitment to Baha'i scholarship was increased, and in 1975, Dennis and myself were both accepted for postgraduate research on Baha'i subjects. Dennis at Cambridge, myself at Lancaster, whilst Mujan had his first book, his study of Dr. Esselmont, published. Then, in 1977, the Departments of Sociology and Religious Studies at the University of Lancaster lent their support to the first Baha'i Studies seminar of a fully academic nature held in the UK. The success of this venture prompted the holding of a further 3 seminars held on an annual basis up to 1980, all under the aegis of the Sociology and Religious Studies departments at Lancaster. As a related development, Dennis and Mujan organized a Baha'i Studies seminar on ethics and methodology in Cambridge in 1978. Interestingly, the Universal House of Justice received a copy of the report of the Cambridge seminar, responding with an included statement on Baha'i scholarship prepared by its research department in 1979. Brief summaries of the Lancaster seminars have been published, but not yet of the Cambridge report. All told, we had a total of 20 substantive papers presented at the 4 Lancaster seminars, many of them later published as academic articles or incorporated into other works. 13 of these were presented by Dennis, Mujan, or myself, and another 7 by individuals who presented only 1 each, including several from overseas. These 7 were Anthony Lee from Los Angeles, Denise Mossop from Lancaster, Harry Peltola from Helsinki, Lonnie Bramson, then from Louvain, UC, and Juan Cole from UCLA, and Stephen Scholl from Oregon, Stephen Lambden from Newcastle. A full list of presented papers, I'll add in the notes below the video. I don't have a record of all those who attended the seminars and contributed to their discussions, but didn't present papers. Note that in 1978, we prepared a register of individuals currently involved in Baha'i studies at an academic level, which provided details of their publications and research interests, including 17 entries, but undoubtedly this was incomplete even for that date. Later seminars have been held in Britain, in Newcastle and more recently Oxford, and continued this early tradition, but they're beyond the purview of this presentation, and indeed of my direct knowledge, as I left Britain for Thailand in 1985, and have only rarely been able to return. It's possible to identify three contexts in which the British seminars emerged: the revival of academic scholarship on the Baha'i and Baha'i religions, a general interest in serious faith-based study of the Baha'i faith, and the informal friendship networks which made the seminars in Britain so enjoyable. First of all, in terms of academic interest, after E.G. Brown's publication of his materials for the study of the Baha'i religion in 1918, there was a long hiatus in Western academic studies of the Baha'i and Baha'i movements, which, for the participants of these seminars at least, was ended by the publication of Hassan Baliuz's monograph on Brown's contributions to Baha'i studies in 1970. During this hiatus, the Baha'i and Baha'i religions were largely invisible to the academic world, albeit that there were occasional articles and dissertations which attracted at the time little attention. As it was particularly important for my own work, I should mention here Peter Berger's unpublished PhD thesis from 1954, From Sect to Church, a Sociological Interpretation of the Baha'i Movement, which I've written about in a couple of published articles. It's been a useful achievement of several of those involved in the British Baha'i Studies seminars to have contributed, together with academics from outside of Britain, to the serious presence of Baha'i and Baha'i studies in the academic world, with contributions to religious studies, history, and the sociology of religion. The second context is that of institutionalized faith-based scholarship. This is symbolized, or was symbolized, by the establishment of the Canadian Association for the Studies of the Baha'i Faith in 1975. That is roughly at the same time as the re-emergence of academic studies in Britain. Although not confining itself to the narrow academic focus of the British seminars and insisting on a religious underpinning for its projects deliberately excluded from the British project, it shared a commitment to the scholarly study of the Baha'i and Baha'i movements. The popularity of this Canadian venture was indicated by its later expansion, the Canadian Association later being renamed the Association for Baha'i Studies, ABS, in 1981, with affiliate groups formed in various parts of the world. Let me say in passing that I don't think there's necessarily a rigid divide between academic and faith-based scholarship. Good scholarship is good scholarship, regardless of its religious presuppositions, or the lack of them. The third, and perhaps unconscious context for the British seminars was the nature of the British Baha'i community at that time. The Baha'i community in Britain at that time was very small, and therefore relatively close-knit. By the 1960s, it also had a very active and sometimes rather raucous youth component from which most of those involved in the early seminars were drawn. The major participants were all long-term friends and were used to working together. This meant that it was natural for the seminars to have an informal and cooperative atmosphere despite their seriousness of purpose. In terms of issues raised at the time, participants in these early seminars were concerned with several issues which were discussed most explicitly at the Cambridge Methodology Seminar of 1978. These included the justification for academic Baha'i studies, methodology, and the relationship between Baha'i scholars and the wider Baha'i community. If we are to judge by later and contemporary online discussion groups concerned with Baha'i studies, these issues are still seen as of importance by many people, so there's always likely to be ongoing debate. We were concerned at the time with facilitating the interchange of ideas amongst all those interested in Baha'i studies globally, compiling lists of researchers and publications at the time, a vital task now made massively easier through the development of the internet. In retrospect, our early efforts were still conducted in the era of Gutenberg and surface mail. So, the British seminars have, up to the present, yielded much value and interest, and a good number of the formal papers contributed have found their way into print, both in the Kalimat series of studies in the Babi and Baha'i religions and the excellent Baha'i Studies Review. I hope that future papers will continue to find published form, particularly in the wider academic world, as per a few early articles in the Journal of Religion and more recently in the Journal of Religious History. As a side note, it seems to me that academic studies of the Babi and Baha'i religions have an important role in establishing the public credibility of the faith. We live in a world in which there are a myriad of religious movements, some old, some new, which vie for attention in those countries in which there is genuine freedom of religion. The perceptions of these movements vary widely, some being seen as negatively as bastions of fanaticism, intolerance, or so-called cultic behavior, whilst others are regarded as useful communities in national and international discourse. To qualify for the latter status, religions need to be seen as tolerant, non-fanatical, and intellectually credible. Academic assessments are relevant here, and academic studies of the faith can play a significant role in increasing its public visibility. They can also, I think, add usefully to Baha'i self-awareness, counteracting any tendencies towards intellectual parochialism. As to subjects, whilst a good beginning has been made, there still remains a lot to be done, certainly in the areas of history and sociology, which are of most interest to me. These include more studies of particular Baha'i communities globally and an examination of the recent developments of the faith, particularly since 1963. Given that we now live in an interneted world, we have far more opportunities to share our ideas widely, not only in academic journals and books, but also through blog sites and YouTube. So thank you very much for listening, and you're very welcome to support my YouTube channel if you want to. Like, comment and share on the videos, several of them concern Baha'i topics. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support, and in particular let me offer my hearty thanks to my patrons, without whom I wouldn't be able to make my videos. Have a good day.